This is one. This is one.
Eric?
Yeah. All right.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to this side event. We're super gratified to see you all here. My name is Eric Richardson. I run a Geneva-based NGO called INHR. And once upon a time in my life, I was a U.S. diplomat stationed in Beijing. I worked most of my career on Chinese affairs. And when I retired in 2018, I started working on what we call Track 2 dialogues, to keep the United States and China talking to each other, even in challenging political times. As you all know, if you read the newspapers, those challenging times are continuing today, but we're here to show you that the United States and Chinese experts can work together to address global problems, in particular, the issue of synthetic opioids. For the past 18 months, several of the people in this group are amongst an expert group who work together specifically to look at the idea of having a comprehensive approach to synthetic opioids. So we have people from law enforcement, from policy, from the private sector, from the health community, all working together. And the book that, if any of you don't have, we have more copies of, this is kind of the final report of the first phase of our project, which we call the Comprehensive Drugs Dialogue. One of the things we found, which is documented in the book, is that when the United States and China work together from a common perspective, they can save lives, protect societies, and punish drug traffickers. And in particular, we found that focusing on the empirical evidence and avoiding blame on either side was an important way to move towards success. So on behalf of my NGO, INHR, our Chinese partner from the Shanghai University International Center for Drug Policy Studies, our donor organization, Pax Sapiens, and the member states who sponsored us, New Zealand and Cabo Verde, let me welcome our 4 panelists. First, we'll hear from Sherry Weibel of the American Chemistry Council, and she'll offer you an interesting perspective about how the private sector can help address synthetic opioid precursor issues, including through training. Sherry, I'm gonna just pass the floor to you and let you go from here, so please.
Great, thank you. So hello, everyone. Again, my name is Sherry Weibel. I'm with the American Chemistry Council. I want to thank Eric and INHR for the opportunity to be here today and to share with you some perspectives from the private sector on the issue that we're addressing. So what I'd like to tell you a little bit about are some impacts that trafficking in drug precursors has on legitimate trade. I'll also tell you a little bit about some voluntary initiatives that industry takes to address this issue, and then share with you a project that we're proposing to do under the auspices of the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation umbrella. So a little bit about who we are. So again, I'm with the American Chemistry Council, ACC. We represent more than 190 chemical companies involved in the business of chemistry. We're largely an advocacy organization, and we're based in Washington, D.C. So all legitimate chemical manufacturers do face significant business risks due to the illegal trade in drug precursors. And I've included some of those on the slide for you here. So there's always the possibility of banning or listing additional chemicals, increased regulation and import requirements. And we're already hearing a lot about this issue from our member companies, particularly in some of the Southeast Asian economies. Of course, damage to our reputation, which no company wants to have, no matter what industry you're in, additional supply chain complexities, and of course, enhanced security practices that might be required if your products are stolen or diverted. And so how does the industry respond to these additional risks? Well, again, there are 2 voluntary initiatives that we have undertaken to really go above and beyond the regulatory requirements in our countries. And the first of those is called Responsible Care. So Responsible Care is the global chemical industry's voluntary initiative to drive continuous improvement in safe chemicals management and achieve excellence in environmental, health, safety, and security performance. So national chemical associations around the world work with their own member companies to implement the initiative in their respective economy or region. Responsible Care was launched in 1985 in Canada, so it's been around for quite a while. It's obviously grown over the years, and now there are 64 national chemical associations implementing responsible care in nearly 70 economies around the world. And so every implementing association is expected to implement what we refer to as the 8 fundamental features for associations. And I've included those on the slide before you. The one that I'd like to focus on today is the third. Every association is expected to establish what we call a set of codes of management practice. And those codes really are the policies that cover important topics that their responsible care program is supposed to cover. So they look at things like environmental protection, employee safety, product stewardship, and security, which is of course the important topic that we're here to talk about today. So when the chemical industry thinks about security and security threats, we largely put those into 3 buckets, right? There's always the possibility of theft of products, whether it's on site or while they're being transported through the supply chain. Obviously, the illicit use of dual-use chemicals, right? And we've long focused on looking at precursors that are used for chemical weapons. And of course, today we're talking about the use of precursors for narcotics and drugs. And then the third category is plant sabotage, right? Someone just causing damage to our plant or to the community in which we're located. And so after the terrorist attacks on September 11th, 2001 in New York City, there was a lot of concern about critical national infrastructure amongst the US government and a wide variety of stakeholders, right? All the people that live in these communities. And so in response to that, the American Chemistry Council developed and implemented what we call the Security Code. Now, the purpose of the Security Code is really to protect the people, communities, property, products, processes, information systems, etc., by enhancing the security throughout the chemical industry supply chain. So looking at the plants where we make the products and all along the supply chain to the final end user. So a standalone security code has been adopted in many other responsible care programs around the world, similar to what we've done in the United States. And some other associations have added a security element to their various codes, looking at some of the issues that I've already talked about. So obviously a variety of ways to address security, and folks do it in whichever manner makes most sense in their own economy. I would highlight for you that responsible care really complements existing government security regulations, right? This isn't in place of government regulations. All of our member companies have to adhere very strictly to government regulations, and we are highly regulated in this area. But responsible care is an area that enables us to really go above and beyond those government regulations. And so the second voluntary initiative that I'd like to talk about is something called Know Your Customer. So Know Your Customer is a key security practice. And this is where our commercial partners are expected to demonstrate their ability to secure a product when it's in their possession. And when I refer to commercial partners, I'm talking about transportation companies, distribution companies, anyone that's going to come to a manufacturing facility, take possession of that product and move it. We're talking about warehouse facilities, right? If products are stored, and of course, end users and other manufacturers. Manufacturers, our members, also provide a lot of education and support that includes a security focus. And that education and support will go to their internal staff, right? Because our members want to make sure that their staff understands exactly what it is they're handling and the security risks around that, as well as commercial partners and other stakeholders. Now, Know Your Customer programs are different from responsible care, and they complement responsible care, right? You can't use one or the other. Know Your Customers really are complementary to a broader responsible care program. So some of the Know Your Customer programs, they're really aimed to ensure that a chemical is being purchased by, delivered to, or received from a known approved individual or an entity, right? Because we want to make sure that they're not used, even if bought legitimately, right? If some nefarious actor comes and tries to make a legitimate purchase from a chemical manufacturer, they want to make sure that they're not selling to a nefarious actor. So they set up these programs to make sure that that doesn't happen. And some of these policies actually include the ability to just refuse to sell to someone that doesn't meet these stringent criteria. And some of the things that our member companies do is that they will actually go to a purchaser's site to verify that they are capable of securely holding the goods once in their possession. And there are some other things that are seemingly common sense, things like making sure that you know and use normal business practices, right? You don't want to sell precursors on a cash basis, things like that. And so within the comprehensive drugs dialogue, the private sector working group is really looking to advance our work through the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum, known as APEC. Now, APEC really is a trade facilitation mechanism. It's a premier economic platform within the region. And this is really an opportunity for us to advance chemical industry priorities and to come up with solutions to challenges that are facing our industry, right? And drug precursors and the trafficking of them is a challenge, obviously, facing our industry today. And so the group, the private sector working group, is looking to do a few things. Right now, we are preparing what we call a capacity building project proposal for APEC that would include information on how to manage drug precursors. And that would include expanded implementation of responsible care, know your customer, to a broader part of our industry. The idea is that we will develop a best practices guidance document that looks at not only the regulations in APEC member economies, but best practices of industry, things like responsible care, and lessons learned. Now, we want to obviously share this with the 21 APEC member economies, but the idea is that we would also make this guidance available more broadly to non-APEC members as well. One of the things that we're looking to get from this political direction via endorsement by the leaders, right? We're hoping that the leaders would endorse this guidance document to give us a lot of political momentum, and of course, enhance technical capacity of the member APEC economies would be a big deliverable. So what I would like to pose a question that I have for all of you. When we get to the Q&A session, it would be very interesting to hear, for those of you that are not part of APEC, if you could think about how a best practices guidance document might be useful in your economy and how it could be applied both within the government and our industry. Thank you very much, and I look forward to our discussion.
The private sector, because often in the dialogues that take place in the UNODC, we don't get to talk about the private sector. We're going to move from there to something that's probably more familiar, more comfortable to all of you, which is policy. And Dr. Zhang Yong'an headed our policy working group. He's also our co-host in this process. So thank you, Yong'an. Let me turn the floor over to you to talk about how U.S. and Chinese experts found common ground in the policy arena.
Thanks, Eric. And ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, I'm very happy to be here and to discuss policy findings of Track 2 and comprehensive drug dialogue that all center ISTAT, CDD, and Shanghai co-organized with the INHR. So,
went very fast. The forward one, just one. Jack can help you too.
Yeah, yes.
I'm happy to help, no problem.
You could delete
We'll let Jack do it. You want to go to slide 2? Is this there you go.
Sorry. Yes, and we are addressing the critical challenges, the global synthetic drugs crisis, driven by the rise of fentanyl, lithium, tramadol, and new cell-active substances, which are reshaping the illicit drug market. This map is from UNAIDS
So we'll let Jack do it. I'll take it, see if we can keep it in the right place. Go ahead, you keep going. I think if people
So-
understand.
US, China, and both nations have a shared stake in solving this crisis. On the one hand, the US fentanyl epidemic is a public health and crisis with over 100,000 overdose deaths in 2022. The majority linked to the synthetic opioids. On the other hand, China has also, next slide, please.
It is sensitive.
China has also suffered from 不要全屏，
Yeah.
有这个全屏。对，
就这样吗？
来，往前面一点，
再往前一张是吧？
再前一点。
再前一下。
OK
行，那我就先这么放。
Okay, sorry. Yes, and on the other hand, China has also suffered from illicit drug use, from the devastating opium crisis in the 19th century to the resurgence of synthetic drugs today. Synthetic opioids are not confined to one region. They are part of the global problem, requiring global response. Next slide, please. One of the most complex but essential partnerships to address this crisis in China-US economic cooperation. Despite decades of engagement, diplomatic tensions, trade disputes, and shifting global policies have created major roadblocks. But there are also opportunities to rebuild trust and find common ground. We know US-China economic cooperation has experienced over 1 century progress and setbacks. These pictures and story began over 1 century ago in 1909 when the world got together in Shanghai for the first International Opium Commission. That historical meeting, co-initiated by China and the United States, marked the beginning of international cooperation to address world drug problem. Next, please. More important, since 1979, the US and China has cooperated on drug control, making narcotics a highlight of their bilateral relations and working on training programs for law enforcement, joint investigations into transnational drug trafficking, and information sharing on drug trends and precursor chemicals. This partnership was not without tensions, but it was constantly productive until recent years. Recent diplomatic conflicts, including trade wars, Taiwan tensions, and sanctions on Chinese companies, have disrupted long-standing counter-narcotics and framework. The former US House Speaker's Taiwan visit in 2022 led to complete suspension of China-US drug cooperation, worsening intelligence gaps. The result, more fentanyl precursors entering illicit markets, fueling further overdose crisis. This is at a moment when synthetic drugs have fundamentally changed the nature of drug trafficking. Unlike plant-based and drugs, we know heroin, cocaine, marijuana, synthetic opiates can be produced anywhere at lower cost with easily accessible chemicals. Next, please. In 2019, China became the first country to impose a class-wide ban on fentanyl-related substances, a move that was praised globally. However, illicit traffickers adapted quickly, shifting production to new synthetic drugs, using alternative precursor chemicals from multiple global sources. We know, and there are many countries, there are more and more countries and involved in the precursor chemical trafficking network. China has strict precursor control, but enforcement is hindered by limited cooperation and political tensions. Criminal networks employ loopholes in international trade system to traffic precursors through third-party countries, making detection harder. Without stronger multilateral intelligence sharing, regulations remain ineffective. Next, please. Effective US-China conducted cooperation is not just about law enforcement. It requires political will and choice at the highest levels. The politicalization of drug policy has made progress nearly impossible, as conducted efforts occurred in the broader US-China tension. Instead of joint enforcement, we now see blame game and economic pressures tactics. Timely intelligence sharing is essential to stopping illicit fentanyl production and trafficking. Yet, because of the geopolitical tensions, intelligence sharing mechanisms have collapsed, leading to delay in enforcement actions. The media and research communities, including all of us, and also suffer as lack of access to official data, to misinformation and speculation rather than evidence-based policy. Next, yes. President Xi and Biden meeting at APEC 2023 in San Francisco led nevertheless to an agreement restore dialogue on drug control and marked an important turning point. The China-US Counter-Narcotic Working Group was relaunched in 2024, signaling renewed willingness for collaboration. But there is a need to move beyond dialogue to real enforcement and policy coordination. Next, please. Unfortunately, this might be endangered by the President Trump 2025. Tariffs on China is the last 2 months, February and March 2025, instead of addressing the real issue, which is the criminal networks importing precursors loopholes. Tariffs only escalated economic tensions, making cooperation even more difficult. Tariffs do not disrupt illegal supply chain. They push the market further underground, making tracking and enforcement harder. These measures undermine diplomatic efforts, reducing China's incentive to engage in bilateral drug control cooperation. So I think we need a smarter, more collaborative, productive approach to address fentanyl crisis. Firstly, we should reframe crisis as a global challenge. The fentanyl crisis is not confined to the US, not just confined to the Mexico, Canada. It is a global emergency. Secondly, we should strengthen multilateral coordination through the UN we're here and regional frameworks instead of the unilateral trade restriction. Recent actions to bring Mexico and China into our conversation about fentanyl problems in the US can be positive, but should also based on global rules and systems, not just bilateral pressure. Thirdly, and I think we should promote joint scientific research and technology sharing on tracking synthetic opioids and precursor and drugs, and share and have shared the information and ideas. The next, this one, fourth, and I think we should enhance regular, transparent law enforcement cooperation through established channels like China-US Counter-Narcotic Working Group. Finally, we think we should engage all stakeholders and public health, law enforcement, government, international community, private sectors, and I think also media, public, all of us, and must be at the table. So finally, and despite the political tension, collaboration is possible. But we believe, and it has worked in the past. Okay, the resumption of China-US Counter-Narcotic Working Group is a small but crucial step. Trade wars and economic pressures tactics will only make crisis worse. Well, a science-based multilateral approach is the only real solution. So we should act now. The drug crisis will not wait, and neither should we. let us work together, not as rivals, but as partners, to create a safer, healthier world. Probably in the future, we will have a drug-free world for future generation. Thank you for coming and thank you for listening. And this is our center, and we also have some events and on the International Forum on Drug Policy, we will and host the next and forum in this July. So we wish and you could join us. And thank you. Thank you.
Professor Zhang, I think that was a really great overview of the kind of challenging issues that we have already talked about in the policy group and the challenges that we have yet to talk about. So you probably got the sense from the booklet and the other presentations that this project focused on just the US and China. We do have a next year that we're going to continue the project. We are going to try to broaden, and Professor Zhang gave a really nice sense of that. Our next speaker is former DEA agent based in Beijing, Dan Baldwin. He had a long career with the DEA, and he is now working with our donor organization, Tax Safely. So I'll turn the floor over to Dan on that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dan.
Never easy to follow a professor. Anything like this, for sure. So we're going to talk about law enforcement, or excuse me, this problem from a law enforcement perspective. And by the way, my daughter made that slide with the picture. I wasn't so egotistical to put my picture, but anyway, I kept it. So I will discuss law enforcement challenges related to synthetic opioids, specifically fentanyl, and I will highlight the importance of international cooperation, particularly, of course, between the United States and China to find solutions. We all know in this space that the political spotlight steals most of the focus. But despite the complexities in our relationship, we have a history of successful cooperation, and I'm going to go over 2 examples of that. But many of you here have probably heard of these 2 examples. One was already mentioned here as far as the class scheduling. They stand out, and I will share with you, showing that even in the midst of political issues, there is great potential for impactful cooperation. So, oh, you're going to go with me. Excellent. Thank you. The fentanyl crisis is a global issue, of course, not confined to one nation, and law enforcement plays a critical role in this epidemic. It seems obvious to state that, but at the end of the day, that's where the problem gets solved. And I think as we come to meetings like this, we talk to other folks about what is happening, how we're going to do it, what regulations, what new law, what agreements can be in place. At the end of the day, it's our people in law enforcement on both sides of the oceans that have to actually implement these things and make them happen. So that's the perspective I'm trying to bring you. So slide 3, fentanyl is obviously deadly synthetic opioid and responsible for many deaths, many challenges in law enforcement. I remember when I first started, when this whole crisis began, we had forms where we filled out what was being seized at whatever place, and on the form there was no place for fentanyl. So it was really one of those problems that we had to learn to figure out how to understand it better. Because if we don't even have a box on a form that says fentanyl, how can we then say that this is a problem? And I think that was something we've really grown past. We've really developed in that area. As Professor Zhang has said, for decades, the U.S. and China have engaged in counter narcotics cooperation through the China-U.S. Working Group and other platforms. I know we had a recent, they're calling it the first China-U.S. Working Group reinitiation, but actually there was many before that. Very interesting to see that it was considered the first one, which is fine, but there were many before. While recent geopolitical tensions have created frictions, it's important to remember that they are not insurmountable. Okay, so the question I ask is what can lead to a breakthrough in our cooperation? It comes down to prioritizing results, recognize that fentanyl doesn't care about what border you're in or who you are or where you sit, and then committing to practical, actionable solutions, having a full commitment to that. And then, of course, what hinders cooperation? What is it that, when I was the country attaché and Lily was the FSN over in Beijing, Tiffany was over at the MD, we would see things in the press that would just make our hearts skip, because we knew that whatever was said was going to make it harder for us to do our job. It's really unfortunate from that perspective, right? Because here you have people that really are dedicated, wanting to do the job, and then you have other people, I think you could say in the peanut gallery, so to speak, if you could say that, but an audience that's a third party having an impact directly on what we do. And it makes our hearts skip because we want to do the work. We want to figure out how to fix it. So what can we do to foster stronger cooperation between nations, particularly US and China? We need to demand a focus on practical, actionable steps. Rather than focus on political posturing, we need to ensure that our cooperation is grounded in achievable goals that will have a real world impact. Support law enforcement agencies on both sides. We have to empower the law enforcement folks to do what they need to do. Give them the tools. If they need chemists to come in and tell them, hey, this is the new thing that's out there, understanding what it is we're dealing with. That's why it's so important to understand, what the developments are in regards to this problem, because it's not just fentanyl anymore. Now it's other drugs, it's other new emerging substances that we, as the law enforcement folks, have to fully understand. Sometimes you're wearing a law enforcement hat, you're busting down doors, maybe you're chasing after somebody, you're going to the range, but then other times you're pretending like you're a chemist. We actually have a chemist here, so we don't have to do that. I would always try not to pretend like I'm a chemist when I had a chemist with me, but there were times when you had to pretend like you're a chemist. You had to understand the basics of the chemistry of all this, because hey, if you don't, then you don't understand your problem. Communication, key to any successful collaboration. Without clear channels of intelligence strategies and operational successes, we risk working in silos, undermining our efforts. Those types of mechanisms, like the Joint Liaison Group or the Counter Narcotics Working Group, we see those and we read about those, and that's a real opportunity for those others that are involved in the conversation that I say don't necessarily have a full perspective of what's happening, to have their part of the conversation. And it's really important because in this scenario, we have to have leadership buy-in, right? And leadership sometimes needs to sit down in meetings, have agreements, and be able to say, okay, yeah, I sat face to face and we have agreements. Then that makes us happy. Our heart doesn't skip at that point. Our heart says, okay, we're good, because we see where our leadership is saying, okay, we're ready to support you and do what we need to do. And in some people use the phrase top cover. We have top cover to engage. When that top cover is taken away, it's very, very difficult for us to do anything positive. So when I want to talk about historical successes of cooperation, when I was in Beijing in 2003, 2004, and 2005, which is quite a while ago now that I understand, we did a case in Fujian province, the 125 investigation. This 125 investigation, DEA and the NCB, which is the Narcotics Control Bureau of the Ministry of Public Security, had the ability, and we were sharing information directly, immediately. The 125 case, and I know you've written about the 125 case on a number of occasions, but the 125 case was a case where China and US realized they had to work together, and they worked together well. Very interesting that the CA at the time, the country attaché at the time, Jimmy Say, I would always say, hey, I'm going to go to the embassy and tell them about what's going on. He would always say, no, don't do that. He said, the less people that are involved, the better off you'll be. So when it comes to law enforcement, it's complicated. So I say that again, to tell you, well, there needs to be a renewed focus on the support to the law enforcement people doing the work. It's really, really important for them to have that full support and not be distracted from what they're doing. Then we talked about, then the other thing I'd like to talk about would be the 2019 control of fentanyl as a class. Okay, that was a result of a discussion we had with the Chinese, where the Chinese received the message and said, okay, we understand that this is a problem. Let's see what we can do. It was a discussion in a room where we all agreed to say, hey, let's do it. And that was impactful. I was in headquarters at the time, and we have this thing, it's called the National Forensic Information Lab System. The fentanyl numbers dropped. There was no denying that, hey, this has had an impact on the availability of fentanyl in the United States. And at the end of the day, it saved lives. We have agreements in place already. We don't need to reinvent anything. We have agreements between DEA and NCB that exist in China to do the work. We don't need to do anything more than that. Well, I should say, we have to stop doing stuff that hinders, right? Let's do things that support and take away things that necessarily hinder. I think there's several steps that we could move towards that I think would be very important for us to work towards. Obviously, precursors are the big problem. Obviously, now we're not seeing a lot of direct fentanyls coming out of China, but we're seeing the precursors that supply them. So enhanced precursor control, critical area for strengthening international verification mechanisms. And it's really comes down to the illicit supply, not necessarily the domestic licit supply. Joint law enforcement operations, we must continue to expand on those. I know the DEA office and NCB has done a number of joint operations. Obviously, those are things that need to be expanded on. The other thing, digital platforms are key to understanding the problem. And I think people are now, when I say people, I mean those that are seeking drugs are moving towards digital platforms. Financial actions where we can look at, where the money flows go. China and U.S. did a case, it's called Operation Fortune Runner. I might showcase that at the CDD, which is our other meeting we have. Very successful operation. At the end of the day, they would always, in DEA, you grew up with this notion, you can seize dope all day long, but if you follow the money, you really hurt the bad guys. Because they know they're going to lose dope, but they don't necessarily know or want to lose their money because that's the whole reason for them to be there. So you really have an impact. Focusing on these areas, we can ensure that the U.S. and China are taking meaningful steps to address the crisis. Law enforcement officers are ready and capable, but need full support. Consideration must be practical and not political. Policies must enhance and not hinder. So in conclusion, I don't know how I'm doing with time, but in conclusion, some short conclusion. So obviously, U.S.-China collaboration is essential. One thing that I didn't mention here, but I think it's important mentioning, U.S.-China cooperation and collaboration is essential. We also have to consider Mexico, right? I know China has recently engaged with Mexico. Mexico's got to be a piece of that. Without that piece of it, it's very difficult for us in the U.S. to identify sources of chemicals, sources of drugs with the Mexico side. So Mexico is key, and Mexico cooperation is key, active, effective cooperation. So a structured, technical, and intelligence-driven approach will enhance our enforcement capabilities. Strengthening bilateral mechanisms is crucial. So like the JLGs, these different events, we need to make sure they're working and give them our full support. A breakthrough is not about grand diplomatic gestures. It's about something simpler, but harder, focusing on practical, results-driven collaboration. Just as the 125 operation in China's 2019 scheduling showed what we can achieve, we need to continue to demonstrate that collaboration is possible. We already have frameworks for cooperation. Law enforcement teams are all ready to act, but the question remains, are political influences supporting or obstructing their work? That's the question. Are they helping or are they hindering? Let's be clear, if a proposal doesn't directly strengthen the ability of law enforcement to fight the crisis, does it have any place in the discussion? Conversely, if governments on both sides commit to empowering law enforcement, we should fully support that action. Move beyond politics and let those on the front line do their jobs. At the end of the day, lives depend on it. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Dan. And our last speaker, we saved the best for last, Dr. Hao, who is a psychiatrist and the head of the China Association of Drug Abuse Prevention and Treatment. And he has led the public health aspects of our synthetic opioid control project. I also just want to briefly acknowledge that many of the colleagues sitting next to Dr. Hao on that side of the table, on this side of the table, are also members of this group. And in the back, I see a couple too. Not all of them were able to speak today. So Dr. Hao has done a great job of coordinating with this whole U.S.-China team to make sure that he can present. Please, Dr. Hao.
Thank you, Eric. I'm an addiction psychiatrist, and I'm also interested in the drug policy because I had experience work here as a member of INHR 5 years ago. Today I present my subgroup, public health subgroup, report on title of how to improve the Sino-American relationship on drug control. This is very important. This slide shows you the status in China, drug use in China. Next, please give me.
Be careful, it goes fast. Once you touch it, be careful.
Yes. We look at the state of China of drug abuse in China is increased steadily until 1970. 2017. Then it's done 6 years, consecutive 6 years. This is tremendous achievement in global control, drug control. And by the way, the price of drug is up 10 times up. And the new drug users is down. And the number of drug users who quit at least 3 years is also very up. So this is very tremendous. However, we have a lot of challenges. And I think the drug use will be expected to increase after pandemic. Number two, the predominance of supply reduction and compulsory treatment strategy may undermine effort to demand and hunger reduction. This is very important in China. And thirdly, because the number of drug users is down, so a lot of voluntary drug treatment facilities is closing. When 90% reduction. This is very important because it poses a barrier for people to seek access to treatment. And finally, new psychoactive substances are continuing to emerge a lot of new ones, especially used for young people. This is the challenge. Next. And how about the United States? This is a slide from my colleague, Robin. The current state of the systemic drug in the United States is especially the older states is big issues. And a lot of consequences such as hospitalization, incarceration, economic stability, and housing instability. This is what happened in the United States. And the challenge, of course, the older states remain high. And the stigma towards people who use drugs prevents many from seeking help and improve the quality of life. And thirdly, inconsistent presence of recovery support in communities, especially in rural areas. And fourthly, fragmented funding for prevention and treatment, fragmented state system. And finally, tension between the public health and public disability advocacy. This slide is very important because we have a lot of accusation, the mutual accusation. United States accused China, number one, supply precursor chemicals because it is said many of the precursor chemicals for fentanyl production come from China. Number two, inadequate regulation. China's control over chemical and pharmaceutical industry are insufficient. And finally, lack of transparency and cooperation. And China also accused the United States, number one, domestic demand issue. It's your problem. It's not my problem. The demand is high. Why accuse us? And you shift the blame. In Chinese, 甩锅. So the U.S. used China as a scapegoat, diverting attention from its own regulatory and public health shortcomings in handling related opioid use such as fentanyl use. So how to deal with the problem from public health strategies? The number one suggestion is that we should improve track one, that is the official channel, and track two, that is non-governmental channels, to strengthen communication, to improve understanding that because China and the US have quite different from the culture. But we do not understand each other. This is big issues. So the public health center approach should be addressed. Number one, reduce demand and harm reduction from treatment and rehabilitation, coordination effort to educate the fentanyl, the dangers. So culture, sensitivity, and dialogue are important, such as we have a CDD. This is very good example of the dialogue. And this slide also comes from my colleague, Gavin. So how can we mutual help? The China lesson for United States, unified drug policy and public support for drug control. Very important. This is one of the main reasons why China achieved so greatly. Number two, cross-sector collaboration for drug prevention, treatment, and recovery. And the United States can teach China, number one, continue community-based care and medically assisted treatment and implementation of the education service in composite treatment facility and in general medical settings and scientific research. So there are a lot of collaboration chance for both countries. Another one comes from my colleague Peter, because as a medical doctor, as psychiatrist, we are good at resolve the personal conflict by use psychological approach. And we think psychological approach can be benefit for the dispute between China and the US. The personal conflict approach and should be used in the country, the conflict. Number one, build empathy and understanding. Empathy is very important. How to understand your part. Number two, to reduce blame and resentment. Very important. You blame us or we blame you. You cannot solve any problem. Number three, understand enhance motivation for change. Do you really want to change? This is the basic question of the two countries. Reduce the fentanyl issue as a political tool, as weapons. No way to solve the problem. So motivation is very important. What's the reason behind the country? Number four, facility communication and trust building and resolve the conflict issue. We have how to find the best solution for the countries finally join the problem solving. So this is the psychological approach for the personal conflict. I think it can both be used in the countries conflict finally. Oh. So summary, misunderstanding and visual direction, culturally and situation difference. We should know we have culture difference. Because of culture difference, we are misunderstanding. We cannot build the trust. This is a big issue for American and China relationship. Number two, to challenge this understanding. This is very important. So the way forward through the dialogue and collaboration, enhance communication, mutual learning, public health works, trust building, and joint problem solving. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Howe, and thank you to all four panelists. We have a few minutes for questions, and so if any of you have questions, please just feel free to raise your hand and let me know. We not only have the people who spoke for the groups, but some of their colleagues around the room. Absent, I seeing a hand go up, I will ask a first question, and then I'll look to all of you in the audience. But for all four panelists, what is one thing you can think of that you would like to see the US and China do, either at the official level or the unofficial expert level, in the next 2 years, as you come up with all these suggestions? And maybe I'll start with my colleague Dan on the far end.
I thought I had time to think about it.
Yeah, then you get no time to think about it. But please, if you have a question, just raise your hand and we'll be happy to make sure everybody gets to talk.
I think what I'd like to see, I think the most impactful thing we can do is to follow the financial flows of money in criminal cases. So what I would like to see, I'd like to see joint US-China training on anti-money laundering activities. I think that would be significantly important for both.
Thanks. Yonan, anything in your mind?
Yes, and I think we must make opportunities and to invite both sides, and especially officials from DA and from the China's officials to stay down, to have a frankly, deeply communicate on everything. So we must, and that's the officials to know what should do, what could do, what can we do. So probably, and I believe we could find some ways. Probably we know some ways, but we must do it and not just say or no. Sometimes say nothing.
Just do it. I like that. Nike's slogan as well. Okay, great. Sherry, how about over to you?
From the private sector perspective, I think seeing US and Chinese industry work together within the context of APEC, right? The capacity building project that I talked about there, within APEC economies and other third countries, where there isn't the stringent regulations and industry efforts being undertaken to make sure that that these drugs are not trafficked illegally and not in hindering legitimate trade. If US and China could work together in other countries and really share the joint lessons that we've learned.
Great. Dr. Howe.
Yes, I think mutual understanding is the first step to improve the two countries' relationship. Because we are, for countries, quite different. So the good way in China cannot be used in the United States. In contrary, the United States, the good way in the United States cannot be used in China. For example, in China, why we treat so greatly? Because we are compulsory with punishment. We are people's war on drugs. But the war on drugs in the Western countries, especially in the United States, failed. And contrary, in the United States, there are some approach for harm reduction. Harm reduction goes too far. I don't know if my colleague agrees with us. For example, shooting, decriminalization of drug possession, legalization of marijuana cannot be in China. So, persons understand each other. So, stop the blame. That's very important. Thank you.
Please, yes. And we'll let both people ask your questions, then we'll turn back to the panel to answer.
Thank you.
Sure.
I'm Eloisa Brujata from the International Association for Hospice and Palliative Care. And I would like to know from both countries another point from public health perspective. How do you see the impact of this tension on access to opioids for medical treatment of pain?
Great. Yeah. Give 1 second, we'll let her also ask, and then we'll come back to all of you. Please.
I just, so I'm a person in long-term recovery and also formally educated, and I've thought a lot about this and actually spent a lot of time traveling the world, speaking to very important people like in this room. And some of us have come to the conclusion that since we only actually stop about 20% of any of these drugs from getting to people like myself back in the day, that maybe we could, because we could stop trying to control the traffic in ways that always end up violent and so on and so on. And, thereby increase peace in the world. It sounds very hippie-ish, I get it, I do get it. But it is something really to think about because in the end, so my own experience, and that's just anecdotal, I understand, I had to go back on small doses of an opiate for pain, and it's completely legal because, I'm in pain, right? And so my doctor's got it under control, and I have a very honest relationship with her and so on. And it's totally different experience to when I was on the street shooting illegal heroin. So that's something to think about.
Great. So any other questions, just to make sure we get anybody who has some? Okay, so we have, oh, please, please.
If I can. Yes, I work with Dan in Beijing for, that was probably one of the best periods during our cooperation and the US cooperation. So very grateful to have you have this meeting or set event set up during the CNG, and very happy to hear that you're moving progress on this end, which is very difficult to understand. Now I'm working for UNODC on drug control for multilateral cooperation, and I understand the difficulty of that. Just a very quick question. Very encouraging to see that from law enforcement, academia, association, and also Professor Howey to talk about this problem or how to fix it or how to improve it. What's the role that UNODC can play or UN can maybe be part of it? Can I have your insight on this? So we will do a better job, hopefully. Thank you.
No, thank you so much. So I think that's all the questions. So I'm just going to let them come back to the panel for each of you. And if you would also, in answering the questions, give any wrap-up comments because we're almost out of time. So a couple of questions about demand reduction and the impact of supply on, legal and necessary pain relief in demand. And then also a question about how we broaden this just from US-China bilateral to the UN system and UNODC in particular. So Dr. Howey, we let you go first. We reverse the order.
As you know, there are three drug control strategies: supply reduction, demand reduction, and harm reduction. Personally, as a doctor, we think the demand reduction should go to first for the treatment and rehabilitation, and we integrate into the society. It's very important. It's very important. So American people have done a great job, and as a Chinese psychiatrist, I think I should learn from America. And supply reduction sometimes is also very important. Why? Why China achieved so greatly? Because supply reduction. Look at prices of the drug, 10 times high. You cannot offer. Deterrence is very important. At least it's China's experience. This my thought for the pain treatment. And as you know, the pain treatment by using opioid, and opioid is an addictive substance. And I think the U.S. Opioid crisis just began from the over prescription of opioid in the United States. Over prescription. In 2012, 100 U.S. adults had 82 prescription of opioid. This is the first reason why the opioid crisis took place in China. In contrary, in China, the availability and accessibility of opioid is lacking, is inadequate. This is our problem. Now we are talking with the government officials how to change of prescription regulation on narcotics and psychotropic substances. For example, anti-capitalist, I have only 3 days prescription for each patient, for each prescription 7 days for bundles. It's not enough. For the pain in cancer patient, when only 3 days dosage. It's too limited. So we try to work with the government, which is try to increase accessibility and availability of narcotics and psychotropics. That's my thought.
Thank you, Howard. We're almost at time, so I want to make sure I give everybody on the panel a chance. If you have anything on these, maybe it's
I
not
think
you.
this is on my scope.
Okay, where can I go? I'm just gonna very briefly say, I was very persuaded by a couple of the doctors in the corner here, Dr. Schober and Dr. Bart, that we also have to include a sense of harm reduction, because when we think about saving lives, if we don't think about harm reduction, we are kind of ignoring people who have been, in recovery, and that our scope should be generous enough and broad enough to include harm reduction as well as supply and demand reduction. So thank you to Gavin and Chelsea for their contributions on that score. Yonah, please.
Yes, and but I totally agree, and Professor Hall is there, and sometimes it's how to keep balance to access the method and to protect the drugs and to the legal and channels. So, and based on the UN systems, and I think most countries also have policies and laws, and the most important things is the keep balance. Probably you heard about that, and Chinese government just launched the white papers on the fentanyl and substance issues. And the first in policies is also the Chinese government will and keeps balance on the fentanyl as a medicine and as a drugs. So, but it's still a Chinese, and Chinese people is a very serious. It's a very worried about that, and is afraid of the drugs. So sometimes they will, if the pain, the most people it's okay. We don't need the narcotics, and so. But I also know it's a very difficult process, and so. But and Lily also mentioned, and I think, and China and US corporations based on the UN system is very important, just because, and it's a drug issues not just linked to the North America. It's just we heard about that. There are more and more, and precursor chemicals from the India and all Middle East and all the countries. There are more and more countries involved in this network. If we just leave the law enforcement focus on China, US, or Mexico, I think it doesn't work. Probably next, and we will have more, all the countries will involve. So how could we build the network? How could we build the global levels of collaboration? How could we to build the system to avoid the drug trafficking, drug use, and drug moving? It's very helpful and based on international.
Thank you. We've gone a little bit over, so Dan, you get the last word.
Okay, so I would just say this, the supply chains for illicit fentanyls and prescriptions are typically different supply chains, right? And they're not, we don't see a lot of diversion of fentanyl patches or things that are in the hospitals. We see when I talked about the reduction of fentanyls in China when they class scheduled, that says a lot about how well they can control it, right? And I think this white paper that's mentioned, there's a total of like 54 kilos that was produced in China for 1 year. Very interesting thing to read and take a look at. So there's a different supply chain. And the other part of that is the cartels are always looking for new, novel ways to get new precursors. So it's a different thing, and I think it's important to understand that. That's what DEA does. They look at the various supply chains, how to best control those two things. And I couldn't agree more about the UN piece. I think the UN piece, that sets the standard, right? That's easy for the US and China to agree. no politician in the US can say, oh, this is bad what you're doing with China. Well, if it's a UN agreement, it helps us with the UN flag, helps us both to say, okay, we're on board with this, and we try to do that as much as we can. And to your question about the 20%, we see is about 20%. Maybe it is 20%. I think that's a little high. But I think the reality of the situation is, from a law enforcement perspective, if we don't address the problem in some way, right? If we just say go forth and use and have an addiction, if we don't address it, if we don't empower law enforcement on the street, remember I said in my speech, it starts on the street and it goes international. If we don't, and this is what the problem they're having in Canada right now. So in Vancouver, there was some legalization that occurred there. Now it's spiraled to a point where the law enforcement folks don't even get involved because it's such a big problem. Then they're not empowered by law to do anything about it. From a law enforcement perspective, that's what we do. We start there. We start from where the suppliers are supplying the people on the streets. If we can't start there, it's very difficult for us to get our head wrapped around an organization. We start there, and yeah, maybe some people don't appreciate how we do it, but then we find people who can talk about the suppliers, right? And then the suppliers of the suppliers. Then, of course, we move, the whole idea of DEA or an investigative agency like NCB is to have the biggest and baddest bad guys attack, but we got to start somewhere. So I'm just saying, we can't have an opportunity, we can't have a full opportunity where people are just given,
Sure.
carte blanche to say use. We got to empower the law enforcement to be able to address it too, in a good way. I mean, this is great to have health. I'm law enforcement, we have health, part of the CDD. The perspective that brings to me from a law enforcement person is very, very important, because it's an aspect that I think a lot of times we in law enforcement forget about. We really need to be thinking about both of those pieces. They complement each other. And, we have to, I think you're thinking, okay, it's not compassionate to arrest the people. But at the end of the day, law enforcement need to understand what the health issues are, what the, harm reduction strategies are, and they can also implement those. They can also bring those, but we have to put those together to work together to solve it.
Thank you. Just one more.
Okay,
So
that's done. We're over time. Last 30 seconds.
we must reconsider what of the fentanyl crisis, post the fentanyl crisis, and we have heard about the morphine, heroin, synthetic drugs, and fentanyl. What the next? So we must consider just the fentanyl crisis is just this period. So we must, and as a whole and big issue, to consider that it's a social and global and very complex and issues, not just the China and US issues.
That's right. And that's a great way to conclude. We'll just say, if you're interested in learning more, or if you represent a country that isn't the US or China or from the UN and you want to be involved, please make sure Jack gets your name and email address, because we'll follow up with you. Also, you can go to INHR.org/US-China, and you can get copies of these materials and other things, and we'd be happy to stay in touch as we continue this project. Thanks everybody for coming. Thanks also to Jack and Nicole for watching. We'll be here if anybody wants to chat. There's nobody in this room for another 30 minutes, so we can.